Hello, people. Um, okay, I'm gonna by the way, I've got some muscle cramp situation, so if I happen to scream, don't worry, it's not gonna kill me. Okay. So some other childhood stuff I remembered. When I was about 6, I fell off a swing and hit my head and had to go to the hospital and get 3 stitches. And I always think about that when I see the playgrounds now. They have a rubberized material under everything that goes up, and certainly the swings. And I think, boy, when I was little, they never mollycoddled me with any rubberized stuff under the swings. If you fell, you just fell on concrete and cut your head and went to the hospital. But it made me stronger, or it didn't. Okay. Um, when I was 9, oh wait, when I was 6, my mother and stepfather took me on a plane trip to Miami, southern Mexico, and Belize. All I remember about Miami is a bunch of old ladies trying to feed me. And it is obnoxious. It does seem, really annoying when they're the feeder and you're the gainer, but it's their way of expressing love. So cool. Um, and then when I'm 9, my father is trying to teach me to use a can opener. And then I moved the wrong way and cut my finger, not my finger, my hand, uh, open. And fortunately, he was a Navy veteran, so he knew how to compress the wound with one hand and call the ambulance with the other. And so they took me to the hospital, and I got 9 stitches. Now, there's some upside to that story. First of all, I did learn to use a can opener, which is a very important skill. Secondly, that scar on my hand is what I used to tell left and right for a long time. Even when I got a tattoo on the other hand, I still looked at the scar because I'm not very good directionally, and sometimes it helps to have a visual reminder. Uh, okay. Uh, on the houseboat wars, yeah, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the banality of evil. Okay, so I'm 14 and I'm living in the houseboats, and there's this guy living in a small boat that's on shore. It's up, it's not in the water. And he likes to talk to people my age, which somebody thought might mean it's, a sexual thing. I didn't get that feeling. I think he liked to talk to people around my age because that was the level of maturity that he had. Uh, so he self-identified as a fascist. He called himself a fascist, and he also proclaimed himself a racist. He did not like black people, he said, although he had met some good ones in jail and in the loony bin. Uh, so this is so common. People say all of the members of, group X are evil, except for certain ones that I've actually met and liked. And the rest of them are just big uniform mass to them. And I was told that I wasn't there, but that he went on a racist diatribe, and someone said we can't have him inciting race riots here. And so another time, I was at one of the protests by the side of the road, and I don't know if it was true, but we were told that there was a sniper sitting in the hill. So one girl wrote a sign, "Sniper in hill" with an arrow, and then he went up and sat where the arrow was pointing to, making it look like he was the sniper. So you may say, what do you mean by banality of evil? This guy's already sounds evil, you know? For me, he didn't particularly seem like it. He was just, this fascist thing was just, everyone had some trip or other they were on, and that was his. Until they searched his boat and there were bombs in them, homemade bombs. So, when I read like the Antifa handbook, and they said fascism is different from any other ideology, because, well, partly because bigotry is part of it. I mean, you might have bigoted communists, libertarians, whatever. You know what I'm saying? But that's incidental to what they believe. But in fascism, bigotry is part of the ideology. Really, it couldn't function without it, and they have to keep finding new groups to hate. If they hate one, they probably hate a lot of others. Okay, and then the other reason is that violence is also part of the ideology. So, for example, in communism, Lenin said, if you want to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. The end justifies the means. So, what they're talking about is violent revolution, but at the right time when the masses are ready. Now, there have been communist terrorists, but again, I think that's kind of their own thing. But in fascism, violence is a means to an end, but it's also an end in itself. So if you have one lone wolf like this guy, he'll do as much harm as he can manage. If you have a few of them, a gang, they'll do as much as they can in harm. And if they take over the country, then they'll have the chance to do a huge amount of harm. Okay, that was that experience, my friend, the fascist terrorist. So now I'm back in. When I arrived in Belize City, I said that Ruby, the woman I first stayed with, washed my clothes 5 times a day. That's an exaggeration. I would say it was about 3, which is still a lot, using scrub boards and such. Okay. So now finally we're back to Punta Gorda. Punta Gorda is in the Toledo district, and within Belize, it was described as the forgotten district. So even within this small country that most people were not paying attention to at the time, which is part of what made it cool, even among that, this was the forgotten part of that. So briefly, I can set the scenario. So there's a road going along the beach. The weather does get hot and muggy sometimes, but there's always a breeze flowing off the Bay of Honduras, which is off of the Caribbean Sea. And then it's a fairly small town, and it's surrounded by greenery, bush, as they call it, jungle, as we call it. So the houses, most of them were a pretty simple construction. Most of them were made out of wood. Some had thatched roofs made out of coconut leaf thatch. Some had, I guess, wooden rooms. The school was more modern, as in brutalist. I think that was made of, it might have been made of concrete. I'm not sure. But then I think the high-end thing was to have corrugated tin roofs, which are pretty cool. The thatch can become a breeding ground for insects. I found that out when a scorpion in another town in Belize, a scorpion fell on my head and I freaked. And then I learned that it was a black scorpion and their bite is kind of like a bee sting. So they didn't understand why I was freaking out. But it's the white scorpions that they'll kill you. And those are more in Mexico and the US Southwest. So, yeah. And the other thing is it had gutters on it. It was designed that way so that it had gutters on it and the water would just run off the sides. It would not pool up on the roof. And then another thing was when it rained, it was really a nice sound. It was pitter patter, pitter patter. It was like being inside a steel drum or something like that. I learned about steel drums down there. Invented in Trinidad. Okay. So then the house I'm living, it has a corrugated tin roof. It, how many rooms did it have? I think it had the bedroom, which had actually a bed, which I slept in, and sometimes other people, and not always because we were hooking up. Sometimes they just wanted the bed because it was a bed. Although that bed had bed bugs, and people knew that, but they really didn't seem to care very much. Here, it's such a horror when you get bed bugs. Over there, they were like, whatever. They call them chinch, and, they had mosquitoes, and they had these, like, bottle flies. One of them, it was yellow with green eyes, and when it bit you, it anesthetized your arm. It made it numb so it could draw blood without you noticing. And that's why they called it the doctor fly, because it uses anesthesia. And then there's a big living room area, which was anyone who wasn't in my bed with me was sleeping there on the floor on a blanket and a sheet. And I did that sometimes, and I've done that actually a lot of times since then. It's not that bad. I did it, into my 30s, I think. I just didn't get a mattress, and I'm not sure having one is preferable. And then there was this room that was kind of like a kitchen. It had dishes and glasses, a cupboard, and for a minute it had a kerosene stove, which almost burned the house down. Awful things. But the real kitchen was under the house, and that was, on the dirt, because the house was raised with stairs. It was under the dirt, and they had, a roof over them to protect from the elements, and they had a stove, which basically it had a hole in it. I don't know if it was dirt or whatever. It had a hole where you would put the firewood, make the fire, and then above that it had some strips of metal where you could put your pot or whatever else you were using. I think usually it was a pot. Yeah, it had no bathroom. no indoor plumbing. So I mentioned that the outhouses were wooden structures over the bay. And what about bathing? You know, in that climate, you have to bathe fairly regularly. So if you wanted to do that, you basically had like a bucket and a bowl, and you carried them to the pump, and you pumped some water into the bucket. You were wearing shorts, you know, because you were out in public, so you couldn't wear you couldn't go nude. They were, you know, they were pretty permissive about a lot of things, but public nudity, especially in anybody who reached puberty or higher, was not acceptable. So I was wearing shorts, and I guess I maybe had some kind of soap, and so then I would fill the bucket up and use the bowl and the soap to wash myself, and then to get the soap off, and then I guess I had something to dry myself. But if I didn't, I probably would have dried pretty soon anyway. So yeah, I actually like that. I mean, it's kind of fun bathing outside in a warm or hot climate. Um, yeah, so I didn't mind that. Generally, they use firewood, and they did chop wood using a machete, not an axe. I never saw an axe. Uh, so I learned to do that with the grain. Even though our machete was pretty dull and rusty as compared to other people's shiny metal machetes. Yeah, so I believe I started a story in the last video and didn't finish it, got derailed. So, as I mentioned, Vanessa, the woman who actually had the house, she somehow got some a can of English K rations. Somehow she got a soldier to give her that, and then she passed it on to me because she didn't feel like making a meal at that point. And so I opened it and ate some of it, and wow, if you're a British soldier, you have my sympathy. That stuff was awful. It was scrambled eggs, but in a can. It tasted a lot more like the can than it did like the eggs, metallic. And then later in the day, not that much later, I drank some hard liquor that for some reason was around, and then I hurled up all those horrible eggs, which is probably good. Who knows? They might have been expired. Yes, the room with the bed. So we also, I guess, did we have a balcony? Not sure. Maybe not. I guess not. But we did have windows looking over the sea from across the road because we were right near that road. That's why our street was called Front Street. And the bedroom also had, so there weren't that many books down there, as I've mentioned. But this bedroom had a collection of books, and it was obviously like the same company had sold it as a set. All the books looked the same. And it was great writings of Western civilization, Homer to Freud, which if I'd been there longer, I would have read more of it. As it is, I read some Plato, a little bit of Freud, and I got the feeling nobody else had read those books for a long time. Actually, if ever, my father said that when he was a prestigious politician, it would look good for him to have a set of books like that on his shelf. Who knows? So yeah, that's where I was. I was always, sometimes I was barefoot. It was always the dirt, the mud, the water, the vegetation. The beach was not a sand beach. It was a mud beach. It was a muddy beach, which obviously not the only one. I saw one in Hawaii, for example. But it wasn't hard to cross, over with. The Garífuna had some canoes, sometimes had canoes right parked on the beach or near it. And they had a specific kind of way of carving their canoes, which they call dories. So they take one mahogany wood, one big mahogany log, and that is a hard wood, but they hollow it out from the inside and they make a little hole in it. And I was in one and I said, "Hey, your boat has a hole." And he said, "I know, that's on purpose. That's so that the fish in here have a little bit of water, and so they, stay alive longer and stay fresher." They knew what you were doing. And you rowed. Don't think there were any oarlocks. You just rowed, paddled. So there was a town, a village, just south of Punta Gorda called Barranco. And this was a Garífuna village almost entirely, except for a few foreigners that lived together in one house, 2 couples, 2 kids. I think one may have been English with an American Jewish wife, and one was American with a Salvadorian wife, and they'd met through the Peace Corps in El Salvador. So it was a weird town most of the time because they didn't have a high school, but they were a culture that valued education. So they wanted their kids to go to high school, which meant they had to stay usually with family in Punta Gorda and only come back during school holidays. So the rest of the time it was, and then they didn't really come back all that much. A lot of them just stayed away. I mean, they'd visit, but they wouldn't move back because they had discovered the outside world. And there were army ants, but not in these people's house. I stayed with these people, and these 4 people. They had a packed earth floor, which is not bad. Actually, these packed earth floors don't get you dirty. You can like rub them. Unless you get it wet, you won't get dirty off of it. And what did they have? Do they have a thatched roof? Maybe. Yeah. One time when I was going there, I was being paddled in by a teenage Garífuna boy, and as we got to shore, he just jumped out of the boat with an oar and just went smash, smash, smash into the water. And I was thinking, what the heck is he doing? And he told me that he had just seen and killed a stingray. So they know their environment. Anyway, So they would be up to junior high school age level, and then it would go up to like old people, like late middle aged or elderly people. So it was weird that it was like missing a generation or maybe two. But anyway, this guy, I went to the yeah, wait. During the holidays, well, the kids would come home, the teenagers would come home during school holidays, which also happened to be Garífuna holidays. And so they would do their traditional songs and dances and drumming, and I thought it was pretty cool. But one of the teenagers said, oh, it's only old people that do this. And another one said, yeah, old heads. That's a phrase they use. And then the one of the people I was staying with, an American guy, basically said, yeah, they really want to lose their culture. They want, which that's their goal. So there was this, when I was in San Francisco, I had a friend, he was this Garífuna boy. To me, he seemed kind of small, and maybe a little dorky. Not stupid, but sometimes maybe a little silly. But he told me, I'm going to get into this, but there was actually a political party that was paid by the government of Guatemala to be the Belizean political party that was advocating that Belize join Guatemala, like voluntarily. And that would have been a horrible thing. But some people, they were convinced. There were many ideas. They were kind of confused. There was a lot of different ideas going around. Anyway, this boy, he said that when he grew up, he wanted to be a revolutionary like Castro and take over the country of Belize. And I said, what do you want to do with it after you've taken over? And he said, probably give it to Guatemala. And I said, no, don't do that. And he said, okay. He'd actually been convinced. I have a feeling that he would have figured out that that was a bad idea anyway, because he grew up to not be a foolish man. I remember another time we were hanging out, which was his idea, hanging out in front of the outhouses. Everybody in town had to go to them, including the teenage girls. And when they did, this guy, his name was Andy, real name, he would say, he would hit on them, and in the Belizean way. And one girl, he said, come on, at least let me drink your spit, at least that. And she said, drink my piss. He said, have some respect. Later, it occurred to me that he might have been more successful if he had done it when the girls were coming out of the outhouse. Because when they're going into the outhouse, they're really not in the mood. They have other things on their mind. Yeah. It turns out, from what I've gathered, that he seems smaller because he was a year younger than the rest of us. That's why he seems smaller and a bit sillier, I guess. But also that indicates that he was smart if he could enter and succeed in high school a year early, and that was a pretty tough high school. So we'll get back, but flash forward. I'm in the US. I'm watching something about Belize, and they're talking about this guy named Andy Palacio, who had founded, he's a Garífuna, and he's founded this genre of music in Belize called Punta Rock. And it's gotten really big. And he's being interviewed by this woman. She said, "So you're the king of Punta." And he said, "Me no like this king thing. Me just another player in the game." And she said, "Well, when I hear Punta, I think Andy. There's nothing I can do about that." He was being modest, but he had invented the genre, I believe. And when I went back for a couple of weeks in the 90s, Punta Rock was huge. It was big all over Belize. When I was there in the 70s, they really didn't have any musical genres of their own. They listened to, well, the stuff I listened to before, but also, I don't know if there's a name for it. I thought it was calypso, but most of it isn't. It's just the pop music of Jamaica and Trinidad, and some of it is really good. I wish I could find it here. But anywho, they didn't have any musical genre that they created their own of their own. But now they've gotten a bit more sophisticated. They knew how to press records. They had 2 radio stations instead of just one. And they even had television, which is a mixed blessing. Probably not a blessing, but nevertheless, it enabled them to do things like this interview, which publicized this guy even more. And not only that, but the Punta Rock, and there was also a dance where you shook your hips, and like I can only do the honky fist dance because when my hips move, my torso follows along with them. So I tried, but I really couldn't do it right. So the genre of music, the style of dance, also had spread to the Garífuna outside of Belize, down to definitely at least as far as Guatemala and Honduras down the coast. And actually, as I said, they were about to lose their culture, really. And they said they wanted to, and other people said they wanted to. And this music was in Garífuna, and so it really revived the culture. Apparently, Andy had gone down all the way to Nicaragua and was very sad to learn that the Garífuna there, which I didn't even know it went down that far, were starting to lose their language. But this was a bellwether because other places too, Garífunas have started losing their language. They don't teach it to their kids, whatever. But it hasn't died out completely. And many people blame Andy Palacio for this, saving Garífuna culture. And besides his music, he did some other organizing. So I researched this guy again. Well, then I remember him saying, "I grew up in Barranco, There was no electricity there. We never felt like we needed it. And I'm like, yeah. I lived there too, and we never really felt like we needed it. And then, he shows the school he went to, St. Peter Clavier College. And I'm like, I went to that school too, what a coinky dink. And then I started thinking, did I meet him? Was there any Garífuna boy about my age in that area when I went there? And then bing, this guy Andy came into my mind. And so Punta Rock is named after the town I was in, which is Punta Gorda, where he was also in. And I checked his name, and yeah, he was only 1 year older. And it mentioned that when the Nicaraguan Revolution came along, he caught the revolutionary spirit and went there for a while. And I'm like, okay, he wanted to be a revolutionary since he was at least 13. But rather than be a violent revolutionary and take over the country for reasons just for the sake of doing it, he had become a much sophisticated cultural revolutionary, I guess. So in the US, that doesn't mean much. He's not much of a celebrity, but he is down there. Yeah. So this ties in with yeah. And like I said, it would be sunny and sometimes it would be very rainy. I met another Garífuna teenager. Most of the people there were really friendly. And he took me swimming in the ocean, and we went way, way out far, like beyond the waves, and then swam back. And I was really, wow, that was cool. So I did it a bunch more times. That has gotten me in trouble because I was so self-confident that everywhere I went, all over the world, I tried to do the same thing. And I generally could, but sometimes I genuinely had trouble getting back until eventually I got caught in a riptide and stopped being so arrogant around the ocean. But then I looked on Google Earth, and it turned out that there is a protected, area there where it doesn't get that deep and it doesn't get that rough. So that's why it was fairly easy to do that. And by the way, I know there's a stereotype Black people can't swim, which is due to environmental factors, but Garífuna can really swim, and they can also row, sail, use motorboats, dive, and some of them have become merchant marines more recently. They're very much a seagoing people. So now I'll get into the politics a bit. So there were 3 parties in Belize at that time. One of them, the ruling party, was called the PUP, which was called People's United Party. And that was the one that George Price was in. George Price was the prime minister for 25 years, and then they voted him out, and then they voted him back in, and then he died. and then became respected like the prime minister, like George. He was the George Washington of Belize. Basically, he steered it through into independence. Um, and they were left centrist. There were a lot of like for example, you could squat undeveloped land, and if you moved there, you could get ownership of it fairly legally. But it was really hard to be an absentee landlord, which is what my father was kind of trying to do, and it's like, like they'll just keep this land clean like it originally was and eventually own it without hardly ever being there. And the laws weren't set up that way, which actually is good. So that was the PUP. The UDP were right centrists. I didn't understand that at the time. There was one guy who just had great oratory. He said his slogan that he repeated was UDP line, right down the line. And it stood for United Democratic Party. When someone asked me who I supported when I was there, which party, I said the UDP because, because they weren't the party in power. And, I'm a contrarian. And besides, that guy was a good speech maker. However little I now know that means. And the third party, I don't remember what it was called. It was run by a man named, I believe, Alejandro Verno. And it basically was an one-issue party, which was Belize should give itself to Guatemala. We'd all be better off. Guatemala was under the rule at that time that, first of all, there was a 35-year civil war going in progress, and it was under the rule of a series of fascist presidents, all of whom seemed to have general as their first name. All of the ones that ran even had general. Anyway, it was a fascist, racist, ultimately genocidal attack on the Mayans. And for some reason, they left Livingston with the Garífuna alone, mostly. They still had cops and soldiers there, but, they didn't bother them. It was too remote or whatever. And that was his issue. And as I mentioned, some people actually got fooled into it. At one point, some of them went to the United Nations and made a speech about how basically Belize would benefit from being under Guatemalan rule. When he came back, as you might guess, he did not get a warm reception from, customs. They were kind of hostile, but they did let him in unharmed. There was free speech, but as I said, there was really no neutral newspaper. There were 3 newspapers. Each party put out its own newspaper, and there was not even a pretense of objectivity. They were all supporting whatever newspaper was printing them. And later, this guy went back and he was reading the he was reading the PUP newspaper, and he said, man, they must just print press releases from that party. And I said, no, there's no press releases middleman. The party just prints it themselves. Oh yeah, so then he comes back to Punta Gorda, and he tries to go, he is giving a speech. A lot of people are not very sympathetic to him, but he points to the outhouses, these wooden outhouses. He points to one of them, said, we are only like 500 miles away from the United States as the crow flies. And yet, look at what we're using, these little children's houses. It's time we wake up. And somebody yelled, there's plenty like that in Guatemala, which was true. He was comparing Belize to the USA, but that's not who was he was at. If things went his way, that was not who was going to colonize them, to the extent that Guatemala isn't a neo-colonial U.S. protectorate, which it is, but they weren't directly going to own it. They weren't going to come in and build everybody flush toilets and buy them paper, toilet paper. And then when I came back later, in 95 or so, I said, well, what happened to Alejandro Vernon? And they said, oh, he joined the PUP, the ruling, the party that had been and was once again the ruling party. So I'm like, okay, he's just a total opportunist. He hasn't ever believed anything, and still doesn't. He'll go where he can gain power and prestige and money, the best he can. So the reason that the PUP, I even heard somebody told me that George Price, the prime minister, had actually picked them up hitchhiking. Can't imagine that happening here with any of our heads of states. The Secret Service wouldn't allow it. Apparently he was alone. And the only reason he was voted out of power for 4 years was because, well, the marijuana trade got big and profitable later on. And some of the people who worked under him had become corrupt. So it was this corruption scandal that forced him out. But nobody ever accused him of being corrupt because everyone knew he wasn't. He lived very simply and ethically. Yeah. They don't all have to be huge. Maybe I'll just end the stream here, and nighty night night.